A new arrival at Pine Hollow Wildlife Center came in angry, untrusting, and notorious for attacking anything that moved. He was a young bobcat, rescued after being illegally kept as a pet and now dangerously aggressive, lashing out at anyone who dared come near. The seasoned wildlife rehabilitators called him their worst case yet. He'd already sent the center's veterinarian home with a bandaged hand. The experts was stumped. All their efforts were met with hissing, spitting rage. But one person saw something else. And she didn't bring training. She brought sandwiches. Everything changed the moment she approached his enclosure. What happened next would not only melt hearts, but redefine what it means to earn the trust of the wild. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The metal carrier shook violently as it was unloaded from the animal control van, accompanied by the most ungodly sound, somewhere between a chainsaw and a demon's sneeze. Inside was 20 pounds of pure, unadulterated fury wrapped in spotted fur. "Sweet mother of pearl," exclaimed Frank Morrison, the head wildlife rehabilitator at Pine Hollow Wildlife Center, jumping back as a paw shot through the carrier's air holes, claws gleaming like miniature scythes. What in tarnation did they bring us this time? Officer Rodriguez wiped sweat from his brow despite the cool October morning. Bobcat, young male, maybe 8 months old. Some knucklehead in Portland thought it would make a cool pet. Kept it in their apartment until it destroyed their couch, their curtains, and nearly took off their neighbor's finger. Frank groaned. These were always the worst cases. Wild animals raised by humans who had no business keeping them, then abandoned when reality hit harder than a 2x4 to the face. The animals ended up confused, aggressive, and unable to survive in the wild. "Did they at least give you a name?" Frank asked, pulling on his thick leather gloves. "They called him Fluffy," Rodriguez said with a straight face. Frank stared at him. "Fluffy? They named a bobcat. Fluffy. I know. I've already filled out the paperwork for a name change. Put down Moose." "Moose?" Frank raised an eyebrow. Rodriguez shrugged. "Look at the size of those paws. He's gonna be huge. Plus, when we tried to transfer him at the apartment, he charged like a bull moose. Seemed fitting." Another violent shake of the carrier punctuated the conversation, followed by what could only be described as the sound of pure, concentrated hatred. "Well, Moose it is," Frank muttered. "Let's get him into quarantine, and somebody better warn the new volunteers. We've got ourselves a spicy one." Pine Hollow Wildlife Center sat on 40 acres of Oregon wilderness, a patchwork of enclosures, medical facilities, and rehabilitation areas that had been Frank Morrison's life work for the past 30 years. He'd seen everything from orphaned raccoons to injured golden eagles, but illegally kept wild cats always broke his heart the most. As Frank and his team carefully transferred Moose into the quarantine enclosure, a process that involved a lot of creative maneuvering and even more creative cursing, word spread quickly among the staff. "Did you see the new bobcat?" whispered Sarah, a veteran volunteer, to the group gathered in the break room. "Frank says he's meaner than a hornet's nest in July." "Meaner than Duchess?" asked Tom, referring to the facility's notoriously grumpy great horned owl. "Makes Duchess look like a Sunday school teacher," Sarah confirmed. Apparently, he tried to take Dr. Peterson's thumb off through the carrier door during the health check. Dr. Margaret Peterson, the center's veterinarian, walked in just in time to hear this, holding up her bandaged hand. "Tried nothing. He succeeded in getting a good chunk. That cat's got trust issues bigger than my student loans." The break room erupted in nervous laughter. Everyone knew that animals with severe behavioral problems were the hardest to rehabilitate. Sometimes, despite their best efforts, these animals never recovered enough to be released or even to live peacefully in captivity. "Where's that new volunteer?" Frank asked, poking his head into the break room. "The one who started last week?" "Ellie?" Sarah looked around. "I think she's cleaning the songbird aviaries." "Good. Keep her away from the quarantine area. Last thing we need is someone getting hurt because they didn't know what they were dealing with." Ellie Thompson had been volunteering at Pine Hollow for exactly 9 days, and she was living her dream. At 62, after retiring from her job as a high school biology teacher, she'd finally had time to pursue her passion for wildlife. She'd grown up on her grandfather's farm in rural Oregon, where she'd spent countless hours rescuing baby birds and nursing injured rabbits back to health. She was methodically cleaning the finch enclosure when she heard the commotion near quarantine. Unable to resist her curiosity, she wandered closer, pushing her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose. "What's all the fuss about?" she asked Tom, who was standing a safe distance from the quarantine enclosure, holding a pole with a food dish attached to the end. "New Bobcat," Tom said grimly. "Completely feral. Won't let anyone near him. I'm trying to slide his food in without losing any fingers." Ellie peered through the double fencing. In the far corner of the enclosure, pressed against the wall, was the most pitiful sight she'd ever seen. The Bobcat. Moose, she'd heard them call him, wasn't the fierce predator she'd expected. He was skinny despite his large frame, his coat dull and patchy. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Behind all that fury was pure, undiluted fear. "Poor baby," she murmured. Tom snorted. "Baby? That baby has tried to attack everyone who's come within 10 feet of his enclosure. Frank had to use a catchpole just to change his water." But Ellie wasn't listening. She was watching Moose's body language, the way his ears flattened not in aggression but in terror, how his pupils were dilated with stress, the defensive crouch that spoke of an animal who'd learned that humans meant pain. "He's not mean," she said softly. "He's scared out of his mind." Tom finally managed to slide the food dish into the enclosure and quickly withdrew the pole. "Yeah, well, scared or not, he's dangerous. Frank says nobody goes in there except him and Dr. Peterson, and even then, only when absolutely necessary." Ellie nodded absently, but her mind was already working. In her teaching career, she dealt with plenty of problem students who just needed someone to see past their defenses. How different could a Bobcat be? Over the next 2 weeks, Moose lived up to his reputation as the facility's most challenging resident. He refused to eat unless the enclosure was completely empty of humans. He destroyed every enrichment toy they tried to give him. He sprayed urine on anyone who came too close to the fence. Dr. Peterson's attempts to sedate him for a proper medical exam resulted in a comedy of errors that left the entire medical team exhausted and Moose still unexamined. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Frank told his wife over dinner, "and I've never seen an animal so completely shut down. It's like he's decided that if he's angry enough, we'll all just disappear." But Ellie had been watching. Every day, she found excuses to walk past the quarantine enclosure. She noticed things others missed. How Moose's aggressive displays were always preceded by a small whimper. How he watched the other volunteers with something that looked almost like longing when they interacted with the other animals. How he carefully avoided stepping on the one toy he hadn't destroyed. A small stuffed mouse that he'd hidden under his sleeping platform. One afternoon, while everyone was at the weekly staff meeting, Ellie made a decision that would have gotten her immediately banned from the facility if anyone had known. She grabbed a bucket of cleaning supplies, her legitimate reason for being in the area, and quietly approached Moose's enclosure. "Hey, handsome," she said softly, settling herself on the ground about 5 feet from the fence. "Rough day?" Moose's head shot up from where he'd been dozing, immediately launching into his standard threat display, hissing, spitting, and showing every one of his impressive teeth. Ellie didn't move. She simply sat there, humming softly under her breath, an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing. She pulled out a sandwich from her pocket and began eating it, completely ignoring the furious Bobcat. Moose seemed confused by this lack of reaction. His hissing faltered, then stopped. He tilted his head, studying this strange human who wasn't running away or trying to approach him. "I had a cat once," Ellie said conversationally, as if having tea with a friend. "Mr. Whiskers. Dumbest name ever, I know. He was a stray who showed up at my door one winter, meaner than a snake and twice as likely to bite. Took me 6 months of sitting on my porch, ignoring him while I ate my lunch, before he finally decided I might be okay." She took another bite of her sandwich. Moose had stopped displaying entirely now, sitting in what could only be described as a bewildered pose. "The secret," Ellie continued, "was letting him come to me. Cats, big or small, don't like being forced into anything. They're like teenagers that way. The harder you push, the harder they push back." She finished her sandwich, stood up slowly, and gathered her cleaning supplies. "Same time tomorrow, handsome." As she walked away, she could have sworn she heard the tiniest, most uncertain chirp from behind her. Ellie continued her illicit lunch visits for a week, always careful to time them when the staff was busy elsewhere. Each day, Moose's reaction grew less violent. By day 3, he'd stopped hissing entirely. By day 5, he was sitting closer to the fence, though still maintaining a safe distance. By day 7, Ellie could have sworn he was waiting for her. It was on day 8 that everything changed. Ellie had just settled into her usual spot when she heard Frank's voice approaching. Panicking, she knew she'd be in serious trouble for being near the quarantine enclosure without permission. She did the only thing she could think of. She stood up quickly and pretended to be cleaning the outside of the enclosure fence. "Ellie?" Frank's voice was sharp. "What are you doing here?" "Just cleaning," she said, trying to sound casual. Noticed the viewing area was getting a bit grimy. "This is a restricted area," Frank began, then stopped. His eyes widened. "Ellie, don't move." That's when she realized her mistake. In her haste to stand up and grab the cleaning supplies, she'd gotten too close to the fence. Her back was mere inches from the chain link, well within reach of Moose's claws if he decided to attack. She could hear Moose moving behind her, could practically feel Frank holding his breath. This was it. She was about to become another cautionary tale about why you always follow protocol at a wildlife center. Then she felt it. A gentle bump against her back, right where it pressed against the fence. Then another, more insistent. "What the?" Frank's voice was barely a whisper. Slowly, carefully, Ellie turned around. Moose was pressed against the fence, rubbing his head against the chain link exactly where her back had been. His eyes were half closed, and from his throat came a sound she'd never expected to hear from their problem Bobcat. He was purring. He's asking for scratches." Dr. Peterson's voice came from behind Frank. Neither Ellie nor Frank had heard her approach, too stunned by what they were witnessing. Moving as if in a dream, Ellie slowly raised her hand to the fence. Moose immediately pressed harder against it, positioning his chin just so. The moment her fingers made contact with his fur, The purring intensified to a volume that seemed impossible for an animal his size. "I'll be damned," Frank muttered. For 5 minutes, nobody moved. Ellie scratched Moose's chin, cheeks, and forehead through the fence while he purred like a diesel engine, occasionally chirping when she hit a particularly good spot. When she finally tried to pull her hand away, Moose did something that would become his signature move. He gently tapped her hand with his paw, pulling it back to the fence. "Did he just—" Dr. Peterson couldn't finish the sentence. "He did," Frank confirmed. "That Bobcat just asked for more scratches." News of the Moose Miracle, as the volunteers dubbed it, spread through Pine Hollow like wildfire. Frank immediately called an emergency staff meeting, where Ellie had to explain her unauthorized visits. "You could have been seriously hurt," Frank said sternly. "Protocol exists for a reason." "I know," Ellie said, properly chastened. "But Frank, he was so scared. I could see it. He didn't need more people being afraid of him. He needed someone to show him that not all humans are threats." Dr. Peterson leaned forward. "While I can't condone the breach of protocol, I have to admit the results are remarkable. In 20 years of working with wildlife, I've never seen such a dramatic behavioral shift." "So, what do we do now?" Sarah asked. Frank was quiet for a long moment. "We proceed carefully. Very carefully. Ellie, you're now officially assigned to Moose's care team, but you follow every safety protocol to the letter. We'll start with supervised fence interactions and see how he responds." What followed was the most remarkable transformation anyone at Pine Hollow had ever witnessed. Within days, Moose went from the facility's most dangerous resident to its most affectionate. But only with Ellie. The first time she entered his enclosure, with Frank and Dr. Peterson standing by with nets and catch poles, Moose nearly knocked her over in his enthusiasm. He headbutted her legs, purring so loudly it echoed off the walls, and when she sat down, he immediately climbed into her lap. "This is a wild bobcat," Dr. Peterson said faintly. "They don't do this. They just don't." But Moose did. He followed Ellie around his enclosure like a lovesick puppy. He chirped conversations at her that she pretended to understand. He brought her gifts, usually his toys, or particularly interesting sticks. And the chin scratches. Oh, the chin scratches. "He's turned into a chin scratch addict," Tom laughed, watching Moose perform his now famous paw tap when Ellie dared to stop scratching. "Look at him. He's trained her." It was true. Moose had developed an entire system of communication centered around his need for affection. A single chirp meant hello. 2 chirps meant scratch my chin. A long, drawn-out chirp meant you've been paying attention to other animals and I'm jealous. The paw tap meant, why did you stop? I didn't say you could stop. But with this breakthrough came a heartbreaking realization. Moose's attachment to Ellie, and gradually to other humans, meant he could never be released to the wild. A bobcat who approached humans for chin scratches wouldn't last long in nature. "He's completely imprinted," Dr. Peterson explained during a team meeting. His illegal owners disrupted his natural development. In his mind, humans are his family, not his predators. Ellie felt tears sting her eyes. "So he's stuck here forever?" "Not stuck," Frank said gently. "He'll live here, yes, but we'll make sure it's a good life. We're already working on plans for a larger enclosure, something that will give him more space to be a bobcat while still allowing for the human interaction he needs." The new enclosure, funded by a social media campaign that went viral thanks to videos of Moose's chin scratch demands, was a bobcat paradise. 3 times the size of standard enclosures. It featured climbing structures, a pool, hidden den areas, and multiple viewing areas where visitors could watch Moose being a wild-ish bobcat. But the best feature, in Moose's opinion, was the special interaction area where Ellie spent part of each day. As she approached each morning, Moose would bound down from whatever tree he'd been lounging in, chirping his elaborate greeting. "Good morning to you too, sir," Ellie would say, settling onto the bench that had been installed specifically for their sessions. "Ready for your morning spa treatment?" Moose would immediately assume the position, head tilted, eyes closed in anticipation, purr already rumbling. If she took too long getting settled, the paw tap would begin. If she dared answer a phone call or get distracted, she'd receive an indignant chirp and a headbutt that meant, "Excuse me, but I don't recall dismissing you." 6 months after his arrival, Moose had become Pine Hollow's biggest success story and most popular resident. School groups came specifically to learn about the dangers of keeping wild animals as pets, watching in amazement as the fierce predator demanded belly rubs from his chosen humans. "He's still a wild animal," Frank would always emphasize during tours. "He hunts, he marks his territory, he does all normal bobcat behaviors. But because of how he was raised, he also needs human interaction. It's not natural, and it's not what we want for any wild animal. Moose can never be truly wild because someone thought a bobcat kitten would make a cool pet. But if Moose minded his captive life, he didn't show it. He had everything a bobcat could want: space to roam, live prey to hunt, humanely raised mice and rabbits, hiding spots for when he felt antisocial, and most importantly, a steady supply of chin scratches from his devoted human staff. "You saved him," Dr. Peterson told Ellie one afternoon, watching Moose attempt to groom Ellie's hair with his rough tongue. "I honestly thought we'd have to consider euthanasia. He was so aggressive, so stressed. But you saw past that." Ellie smiled, gently pushing Moose's head away from her hair. "He saved himself. He just needed someone to show him it was safe to trust again." Moose chirped his agreement, then performed his signature paw tap. Clearly, this emotional conversation was cutting into valuable chin scratch time.